Hello there. So in this video, we're going to wrap up fiscal policy. And again, I am so sorry I've changed this on you and all that. But the 7.3, number three, right? The third practice problem set. This is where we kind of really bring it home, right? So we've got this nice aggregate demand, aggregate supply graph, and it shows that we're at a gap. First, we identify what kind of gap it is, and then we try to fix it. So what kind of gap is this? Well, the current level of output compared to the full employment level, current level is too big, right? So we'd say it's an expansionary gap. And the reason we call it an expansionary gap is because the economy has expanded too big, right? So how big is it? Well, just to look at the size of the gap, it's 100, right? 250 minus 150 equals 100. And I don't know if that's billions or whatever, it doesn't matter. If the MPC were 0.8, how much should taxes, T stands for taxes, how much should taxes be adjusted to close the gap? So you have to think about a few things here. If the MPC is 0.8, we have to figure out what the tax multiplier is. So kind of thinking about that, we know MPS is 0.2, and we know the spending multiplier is 5. And I'm doing this in my head, it's 1 over 0.2. And then therefore we know the tax multiplier is -4. And so our gap is 100, right? So we have to close that gap of 100. So we just say 100 is equal to -4 times some change in taxes, right? The change in taxes. And so, and I'm writing all this out, even though I could probably do it in my head, and some of you might be able to as well, but just to kind of help you work through this. The gap is equal to -4, that's the multiplier, times some change in taxes. So we know the change in taxes has to be -25. So that's the answer here. We're going to reduce taxes by 25. If the MPS, though, were 0.5, how much should government spending, G, be adjusted to close the gap? Well, we're given that, so then we know the spending multiplier is 1 over 0.5, so that's 2. So the gap is 100. Now I'm just going to write gap is equal to the spending multiplier times the change in government spending. So the spending multiplier is 2. So what goes here? Well, that means +50. So that's our answer, right? +50. So that's how we solve these. Now that seems tricky. It just slow down and think about it, right? You want to close the gap, and so you've got to multiply the initial change by the multiplier to close the gap. Students sometimes will multiply the gap by the multiplier. That's wrong. Don't do that. You're not one of those. You're so smart. You multiply the initial change by the multiplier, and that's what you want to do to figure out how to close the gap. And so these questions are saying, how much should the initial change be? All right, let's do the second one. And what kind of gap is this? Well, if we have Y1 down here and YF here, we know this is a recessionary gap. Recessionary gap. And we can just write recession. How big is it? 81. If the MPC were 0.9, how much should T be adjusted to close the gap? So we're just going to repeat this process up here. So we know that MPS is 0.1, and we know the spending multiplier then is 10. So we know the tax multiplier is -9. And so we start with a gap. And we say 81 is the gap. -9 times -9 gives us that. So this is our answer, right? We should decrease taxes by 9. And that's that -9 that we just solved for. If the MPS, on the other hand, were 0.5, how much should we change government spending? Well, if that's true, then the spending multiplier is 2. And so we've got 81 equals 2 times G. And so what should G be? Well, +40.5. So that's the answer for that one. Okay. Now the last part is actually without a graph. So it's just basically the same problem without a graph. Now we'll do this first part first here, these two columns first without even reading the prompts. We can do these 0.67 and 0.1. Now, the thing that I'm going to do is actually thinking about, tax multiplier and spending multiplier and all of that. It might be helpful off to the side to write tax multiplier, spending multiplier, so you have them. So we know that this one's 5, this one's 4, this one's 3, and then this one is, why am I having trouble? 10, 1 over 0.1. Now, this is -4, -3, -2, -9. Now, if you have this, it tells you it is 150, potential is 125. Potential is YF. So if you ever see potential, it just means the capacity, right? The overall capacity of the economy. And so we are actually above potential. So that means we're like this up here, where Y1 is too big. And so the gap is 25. So I'm just going to write here, the gap is 25. And so if we thinking government spending, right, 5 and we want to bring this down, right? The goal is to reduce the current level of GDP. It's too much because potential is 125. So we actually want to reduce GDP by 25. And so we would say decrease by 5 here, decrease. And if we decrease it by 5, that's times 5, so that reduces the gap 25. In terms of taxes, right, this one's a little bit harder, -4. So we're going to want to raise taxes, and we're going to want to raise them by 6 1/4, 6.25. And is that right? 6 1/4, 12 and a half? Yes, yes, because 25 divided by -4. Right, so that's kind of the idea here. And then here it just gives us it's 600 above, so the gap is 600, and so we want to reduce GDP by 600. And so for this one, we're going to reduce it. 600 divided by 4 is 150. And for this, if we did taxes, we would want taxes to go up by 200. And again, I'm using this -3, and I'm thinking I want to close a gap of 600, and I want to reduce it. So I'm going to raise the taxes by 200 times -3 would yield a -600, and that cuts out that gap. GDP is 330, potential is 450. So now we're below the potential. The gap size is 120. So we want to increase government spending in this one. So 120 and then 3, so it's going to be 40, right? So this is the initial change, 40 times 3, 120. Now this one, we're going to want to cut taxes because the gap is recession. So we lower the taxes. And what do we want to lower it by? 120 divided by -2, so that's 60. So we change, we say here 60, cut taxes by 60 times the 2 gives you 120. Then the last part here, the gap is 400. So we just kind of solve by closing this gap. We know we're going to increase spending by 400, increase spending by 40 in this case, because 40 times 10 gives us 400. And 400 divided by 9 is a stupid question for me to ask. So I am going to have to bust out my calculator again. I am so sorry. And this one, we are going to lower taxes by like 44-ish. That was a dumb part on my part. But anyways, hopefully this helped you understand a little bit of how we close these gaps. I'll see you next time.